You building something without a permit? Step away from that fence.
This is my backyard. I don't need a permit for a privacy fence.
Everything needs a permit in this city, and I know people like you ignore the rules.
People like me? What do you mean by that? This is my property.
I don't care about your story. Let me see some ID now.
Officer Vince Hargrove's body camera captured everything. Every word, every illegal step onto private property, every moment of what would become a $6.4 million lawsuit and a criminal conviction that sent a 20-year police veteran to prison for 14 years. The camera mounted on Hargrove's chest recorded the entire incident from his perspective, creating an undeniable record that he couldn't deny or explain away. Every racist statement, every constitutional violation, every second of his illegal trespass and search, all captured by the very device meant to protect him from false accusations. It was 2:30 p.m. on a Saturday afternoon when Professor Terrence Holloway was in his backyard installing a privacy fence. He had bought his house in the Westgate neighborhood 3 years ago, a beautiful craftsman-style home with a large backyard that backed up to a wooded area. The fence was going up because he was tired of having his privacy invaded by curious neighbors who seemed shocked that a black man could afford a house in their exclusive neighborhood. Before we go any further, drop your city or state in the comments. I want to know where you're watching from. Terrence Holloway wasn't just any homeowner hammering fence posts into his own yard. At 42 years old, he was a tenured professor of constitutional law at the state's most prestigious university. He had graduated from Columbia Law School, worked for a federal judge, and spent the past 16 years teaching future lawyers about civil rights, police misconduct, and the Fourth Amendment. His scholarship on illegal searches was cited by federal courts across the country. He had written 3 books on constitutional law that were required reading in law schools nationwide. His home was his sanctuary. He had saved for years to afford the down payment, paying cash for the remaining mortgage with money from his book, royalties, and speaking fees. The house sat on nearly an acre, with mature oak trees, a garden he tended himself, and enough space that he would never have to hear his neighbors' conversations or pool parties. That Saturday, Terrence was doing what millions of homeowners do every weekend, improving his property. He had researched the local ordinances carefully. Privacy fences under 6 feet didn't require permits in his city. His fence was exactly 5 feet 11 inches. He had measured 3 times to be sure. He was setting the 4th post when Officer Vince Hargrove walked into his backyard without knocking, without announcing himself, without any legal justification whatsoever. Hargrove's body camera recorded him entering through the unlocked side gate, walking across the property, his breathing steady as he approached a man who was clearly engaged in lawful activity on his own land. Hargrove had been with the Metro Police Department for 20 years. His personnel file would later reveal what his supervisors had ignored for 2 decades: 42 complaints alleging harassment, racial profiling, and illegal searches. 42 complaints, and he was still on active duty, still carrying a badge, still violating people's rights every chance he got. Hargrove had been driving through Westgate on patrol when he noticed Terrence in his backyard. Something about seeing a black man in this neighborhood, doing manual labor on what was clearly an expensive property, triggered every racist assumption in his head. He decided to investigate, which in his mind meant walking onto private property without permission. Hargrove's body camera captured his approach. The footage shows him parking his patrol car on the street, walking to the side gate, opening it without hesitation, and entering the backyard. No announcement, no knock at the front door, just a direct entry onto private property. Terrence was focused on getting the post level when he heard footsteps behind him. He turned and saw a police officer standing in his yard, about 10 feet from his back porch, looking around like he owned the place. Hargrove's body camera recorded Terrence's confused expression as he set down his tools. "Can I help you, officer?" Hargrove's body camera captured his own response, his hand moving to rest on his duty belt, his posture aggressive from the start. "You building something without a permit? Step away from that fence." The camera recorded Terrence wiping his hands on his jeans, his voice calm and controlled. "This is my backyard. I don't need a permit for a privacy fence under 6 feet, and you're on my property without permission or a warrant." Hargrove stepped closer, and his body camera captured the movement, recorded Terrence's face as he assessed the situation, recognized the danger. "Everything needs a permit in this city, and I know people like you ignore the rules. That's why neighborhoods like this go downhill." The camera caught Terrence's reaction to that phrase, "people like you." His expression shifted from confusion to understanding. He knew exactly what was happening. "People like me? I'm a tenured professor at the state university. This is my property, which I purchased legally. You need to leave unless you have a warrant or probable cause." Hargrove's body camera recorded his smile, cold and humorless. Professors don't live in houses like this. Let me see some ID, and I'm checking that shed. The camera captured him pointing at Terrence's garden shed, a small structure where Terrence kept tools and supplies. It also captured what happened next, the entire constitutional violation unfolding from Hargrove's own perspective. Terrence pulled out his phone, and Hargrove's body camera caught him raising it to record. "Officer, I'm not showing you ID. I'm on my own property, engaged in lawful activity. You have no legal basis to demand identification, and you absolutely cannot search my shed without a warrant. I'm asking you to leave my property now." Hargrove's body camera recorded his hand moving to his handcuffs, captured the audio of the metal jingling as he pulled them from his belt. "You're refusing a lawful order from a police officer. That's obstruction. Put your hands behind your back." The camera captured Terrence holding up his phone, his voice steady. "I'm recording this interaction. You are on my private property without a warrant. I have not committed any crime. You have no legal authority to be here, to demand my ID, or to search any part of my property. State your probable cause or leave." What happened next was captured in perfect clarity on Hargrove's body camera. The footage shows his hand reaching out, grabbing for Terrence's phone, shows Terrence pulling it back, shows Hargrove's hands grabbing his arm instead, twisting it behind his back in a motion rough enough that the camera's image shook slightly. The audio picked up Terrence's sharp intake of breath as Hargrove forced handcuffs onto his wrists. The camera angle, mounted on Hargrove's chest, looked down at Terrence's hands as Hargrove deliberately over-tightened the cuffs until they bit into his skin. "You're under arrest for obstruction of justice and resisting arrest." Hit that subscribe button, because what happens next is going to show you exactly how racist assumptions can destroy a 20-year career. The body camera captured Terrence's calm response, despite the pain. "Officer Hargrove, I can see your nameplate. I'm a constitutional law professor. You're committing multiple federal crimes right now. I'm being cooperative. I haven't resisted. You're arresting me on my own property for asserting my Fourth Amendment rights." A voice called out from the neighboring yard, and Hargrove's camera caught him turning toward the sound. "Hey, what's going on over there?" Terrence's neighbor, Diane Kessler, was standing at the fence line with her phone out, recording. Hargrove's body camera captured Diane's face, shocked, outraged, as she took in the scene. "Diane, call my attorney. Officer Hargrove just walked onto my property without a warrant and arrested me for building a fence." Hargrove's camera recorded him looking at Diane, the annoyance clear in his voice. "Ma'am, this doesn't concern you. Step back from the fence." Diane's voice came through strong on the body camera audio. "I'm recording this interaction. That's Dr. Terrence Holloway, a tenured law professor. He owns that house. What probable cause do you have for being on his property?" Hargrove ignored her, and his body camera recorded the walk to his patrol car, the angle bouncing slightly with each step. The camera captured Terrence's face in profile as Hargrove guided him toward the side gate, his expression controlled, but his jaw tight with suppressed anger. Diane called 911 while still recording with her phone. 911, what's your emergency? This is Diane Kessler at 815 Westgate Avenue. A police officer just trespassed onto my neighbor's property and arrested him without cause. The neighbor is Dr. Terrence Holloway, a law professor. He was building a fence in his own yard. The officer had no warrant and no probable cause. I need a supervisor here immediately. Hargrove heard this through the fence, and his body camera recorded his frustrated expression as he stopped walking. The camera captured his annoyed response. "Ma'am, if you continue to interfere with this arrest, I'll arrest you too." Diane's voice came through clear on the body camera audio. "You can't arrest someone for calling 911. I'm on my own property. I'm exercising my First Amendment right to record police activity. And I'm reporting what appears to be an illegal arrest. Have you ever witnessed something you knew was wrong but felt powerless to stop? Type yes in the comments if you've been there." Hargrove continued walking Terrence to his patrol car, his body camera bouncing with each step. The footage captured him opening the back door, guiding Terrence inside. The camera angle showed Terrence's wrists, already bruising from the too tight handcuffs. He put Terrence in the back of his patrol car, and his body camera recorded him walking back through the side gate into the backyard. Diane's voice called out from the fence, and the camera captured her still recording with her phone. Hargrove's body camera shows him approaching the garden shed. The footage captures his hand reaching out, opening the door. The camera recorded the interior garden tools on hooks, bags of soil, fertilizer, plant pots, a wheelbarrow. "Officer, you cannot search that shed. You don't have a warrant or consent." The body camera recorded Hargrove ignoring Diane completely. The footage shows his hands appearing in frame, pulling out tools, moving bags, searching through everything. The audio captured his breathing as he searched for anything that would justify his illegal entry. He found nothing because there was nothing illegal to find. But his body camera recorded every second of the illegal search, every drawer opened, every bag moved, every tool examined. Diane's phone was recording from the fence line. But Hargrove's body camera provided something even more damning, his first-person perspective. His choices, his complete lack of legal justification, captured from his own chest-mounted camera. A supervisor arrived 12 minutes later. Lieutenant Andre Baptiste pulled up, saw Terrence handcuffed in the patrol car, and approached Hargrove, who was still going through the shed. "Hargrove, what's the situation?" Hargrove straightened up, holding a bag of fertilizer like it was evidence. His body camera recorded the entire exchange. "Lieutenant, subject was building without a permit. When I attempted to verify, he became hostile and refused to provide ID. I arrested him for obstruction. I'm conducting a search based on probable cause." Baptiste looked at the small fence posts, at Terrence's tools laid out neatly, at the bag of fertilizer that was clearly marked as organic garden supply. "What probable cause?" Subject's behavior was suspicious. Building structures without permits often indicates other code violations or illegal activity. Baptiste walked over to the patrol car and looked at Terrence through the window. He saw a man in jeans and a university t-shirt, covered in dirt from working in his yard, with no visible signs of aggression or resistance. He opened the door. "Sir, I'm Lieutenant Baptiste. Can you tell me what happened?" Terrence's voice was steady and clear, and Hargrove's body camera, still recording from the shed, captured the audio. "Lieutenant, I'm Dr. Terrence Holloway. I'm a tenured professor of constitutional law at the State University. I was installing a privacy fence in my backyard, which doesn't require a permit under city ordinance. Officer Hargrove entered my property without permission, without a warrant, and without probable cause. When I asked him to leave and refused to show ID while on my own property, he arrested me. He then searched my shed without a warrant. Everything is on camera. My neighbor Diane Kessler recorded the entire interaction, and Officer Hargrove's body camera captured everything from his perspective." Baptiste's expression shifted from confusion to concern. "Dr. Williams, you teach constitutional law?" "Yes. I literally teach a course on illegal searches and Fourth Amendment violations. Officer Hargrove just provided me with a perfect case study." Baptiste closed his eyes briefly, like he was processing the magnitude of Hargrove's mistake. "Wait here." He walked over to Diane, who was still at the fence with her phone. "Ma'am, I'm Lieutenant Baptiste. Did you record this incident?" Diane held up her phone. "Every second on my phone, I recorded Officer Hargrove entering his property without permission, arresting him without cause, and searching his shed without a warrant. Would you like me to save this file for your investigation?" Baptiste pulled out his radio. "Dispatch, I need internal affairs at 815 Westgate Avenue immediately. I also need the on-duty commander." He returned to Hargrove, whose body camera was still recording. "Did you have a warrant to enter that property?" Hargrove's confidence was starting to crack, visible even on his own body camera footage. "I don't need a warrant to investigate building code violations. Building code violations are handled by the city inspector's office, not police. Did you have permission to be on that property?" "I was conducting a welfare check." "A welfare check on someone building a fence in broad daylight?" "Hargrove, give me your service weapon. You're suspended pending investigation." Hargrove's face went red, all captured on his body camera. "You can't suspend me. I've got 20 years on this force. Watch me. Gun. Now." If you think Lieutenant Baptiste did the right thing by immediately suspending Hargrove, type respect in the comments right now. Hargrove unholstered his weapon and handed it over, his hand shaking with rage. His body camera recorded the entire humiliating moment. Baptiste removed Terrence from the patrol car and took off the handcuffs. The marks on Terrence's wrists were deep and red, already turning purple. "Dr. Williams, I apologize. You're free to go. Internal Affairs will contact you for a statement. I strongly encourage you to file a formal complaint." Terrence rubbed his wrists, looking at Hargrove, whose body camera captured Terrence's steady gaze. "Lieutenant, I'll be filing more than a complaint. I'm filing federal charges for illegal trespass, illegal search, false arrest, assault, and violation of my civil rights under color of law." Officer Hargrove didn't make a mistake. He made a choice. He saw a black man in this neighborhood and decided, "I must be breaking the law." Everything he did after that was based on racism, not police work. Internal Affairs arrived, along with the on-duty commander, Captain Nora Fitzpatrick. She took one look at the situation. Terrence with bruised wrists, Diane with video evidence, Hargrove suspended, and a clear privacy fence under 6 feet tall. that didn't require any permit and knew the department was facing a massive lawsuit. Terrence's attorney, Julian Reeves, arrived 30 minutes later. He was a senior partner at the city's most aggressive civil rights firm, and when Terrence called him from Diane's house, he had recognized immediately that this was a career-defining case. Reeves documented everything, photographed Terrence's injuries, obtained Diane's phone recording, interviewed Diane. Within hours, he filed requests for Hargrove's body camera footage, arrest report, and personnel file. The videos were devastating. Diane's phone footage showed the incident from an outside perspective. But Hargrove's body camera footage was even more damning. It showed Hargrove walking onto Terrence's property without announcing himself or seeking permission. It caught his statement about people like you and his claim that professors don't live in houses like this. It recorded him demanding ID while Terrence was on his own property, engaged in lawful activity. It captured the entire illegal search of the shed from Hargrove's own perspective. Reeves filed the federal lawsuit within 1 week. The complaint alleged violations of Terrence's Fourth Amendment rights, illegal trespass, warrantless search, and unlawful seizure. It alleged violations of his 14th Amendment rights, denial of equal protection based on race. It named Hargrove individually and the police department for maintaining policies that enabled Hargrove's behavior for 20 years. The lawsuit also included detailed analysis of Hargrove's career. Reeves had obtained his personnel file through discovery, and what he found was a 2-decade pattern of racist policing that the department had systematically ignored. 42 complaints over 20 years. 37 involved allegations of racial profiling against Hispanic or Black citizens. Hargrove had a pattern of entering property without warrants, demanding ID from people engaged in lawful activity, and making arrests for obstruction when people asserted their rights. Reeves dug deeper into each complaint, building a comprehensive picture of Hargrove's pattern. The complaints weren't random. They clustered in wealthy neighborhoods where Hargrove seemed particularly offended by the presence of minorities. One case from 6 years earlier was eerily similar to Terrence's. Hargrove had arrested a Black businessman named Isaiah Chambers for trespassing while Washington was mowing his own lawn in a wealthy neighborhood. Washington had been wearing old jeans and a t-shirt, pushing his own lawnmower across his own property. When Hargrove pulled up and demanded to know what he was doing there, Washington explained he lived there, that he was mowing his own lawn. Hargrove demanded ID. Washington asked why he needed to show ID while standing on his own property. Hargrove arrested him for suspicious behavior and failure to comply with a lawful order. Washington spent 4 hours in custody before his wife came home with the property deed and mortgage documents to prove he owned the house. Hargrove never apologized. Washington filed a complaint describing Hargrove's assumption that a Black man in this neighborhood must be hired help or a criminal, not the homeowner. The complaint was dismissed as unsubstantiated. Another case involved Hargrove searching the car of Dr. Lucia Navarro, a pediatrician, during a traffic stop for a broken taillight. Hargrove had demanded to search her vehicle. Dr. Navarro, who knew her rights, refused consent. Hargrove claimed he smelled marijuana, a claim Dr. Navarro denied, as she had never used marijuana in her life. Hargrove searched anyway, tearing through her car while she sat on the curb, humiliated as her neighbors drove past and stared. He found nothing. No marijuana, no contraband, nothing illegal. He wrote her a warning for the taillight and left. Dr. Navarro filed a complaint. It was dismissed. A Hispanic homeowner named Mateo Solis recounted Hargrove demanding to see proof he owned his house when Solis was painting his fence. Hargrove had pulled up, watched Solis painting for a few minutes, then approached and asked if he had permission to be there. Solis, confused, said he was the homeowner. Hargrove demanded documentation. Solis went inside to get his property deed, and when he returned, Hargrove was walking around his yard, looking in windows, checking his garage. When Solis objected, Hargrove threatened to arrest him for interfering with an investigation. Solis provided the deed, Hargrove left without apology, and the complaint Solis filed was marked unfounded. The most disturbing case involved a teenager. 16-year-old Javier Ortega had been walking home from school through a wealthy neighborhood where his grandmother lived. Hargrove stopped him, demanding to know what he was doing in the neighborhood. Miguel explained he was walking to his grandmother's house. Hargrove didn't believe him. He detained Miguel on the sidewalk for 30 minutes, calling the grandmother to verify the story before finally letting the teenager go. Miguel's parents filed a complaint describing their son's terror at being detained by police while doing nothing wrong. The complaint resulted in Hargrove receiving additional training on community policing. Pattern after pattern. Hargrove, seeing people of color in spaces his racism told him they didn't belong, using his authority to harass them, and facing no real consequences when they complained. Reeves also discovered something that explained how Hargrove had operated with impunity for so long. Every single one of Hargrove's 42 complaints had been investigated by the same internal affairs officer, Sergeant Elias Drummond, who had recently retired. When Reeves tracked down Martinez through his lawyer, threatening to name him in the lawsuit, Martinez provided a deposition that was shocking in its honesty. Martinez admitted he had deliberately minimized Hargrove's complaints because they had been partners early in their careers. Brad and I came up together, Martinez testified. We worked the same beat for 7 years. He backed me up in dangerous situations, so I felt I owed him loyalty. When complaints came in, I would give them a surface-level investigation, find some reason to dismiss them, and move on. I knew what he was doing wasn't right, but I didn't want to be the guy who ended his career. Reeves pressed him on whether he understood the harm Hargrove was causing to innocent citizens. I told myself they were exaggerating, that if they had just cooperated with Brad, there wouldn't have been problems. I see now that I was wrong. I enabled 20 years of abuse. That's on me. The department's internal affairs files revealed that Martinez had closed Hargrove's complaints with phrases like insufficient evidence, complainant's account not credible, and officers' actions within policy guidelines. He had never interviewed witnesses, never reviewed available video footage, never looked for patterns across multiple complaints. Quick question. Should officers with multiple complaints be automatically investigated for patterns, or should each complaint be handled separately? Let me know what you think. The department's leadership bore responsibility too. Annual performance reviews for Hargrove consistently rated him as meets expectations or better. Supervisors noted he was proactive and assertive in his policing, never questioning why his proactive policing disproportionately targeted minorities. The department had paid out $230,000 in settlements over 20 years to Hargrove's victims. Each settlement included a non-disclosure agreement requiring victims to remain silent about their treatment. The city had essentially bought silence rather than accountability. An internal memo from 8 years ago, written by former police chief Winston Parrish, laid out the calculation explicitly. Officer Hargrove generates complaints at a higher rate than average, resulting in occasional settlements. However, his arrest statistics remain strong, and termination would likely result in union arbitration. Recommend managing through training and monitoring individual settlements as they arise. The department had known Hargrove was a problem. They had chosen to manage the liability rather than stop the violation. The Department of Justice got involved. The FBI opened an investigation into whether Hargrove's conduct constituted a pattern of civil rights violations. Federal prosecutors began reviewing Hargrove's 42 complaints to determine if criminal charges were warranted. The criminal case moved forward quickly. The prosecutor charged Hargrove with deprivation of rights under color of law, illegal trespass, illegal search, false arrest, and assault. The charges carried a maximum combined sentence of 25 years. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating. Day 1 featured Terrence's testimony. He walked the jury through his credentials, his law degree, his clerkship, his 16 years teaching constitutional law. He described working in his yard, Hargrove entering without permission, his racist comments about people like you not living in houses like this. The jury watched Hargrove's body camera footage. They saw from his perspective as he walked onto Terrence's property without announcing himself. They heard through his microphone as he demanded ID while Terrence was on his own property. They heard his statement that professors don't live in houses like this. The camera captured his hands, grabbing Terrence, forcing handcuffs on him, then searching through the shed. The body camera footage was irrefutable. It came from a police source showing exactly what Hargrove chose to do. He couldn't claim it was edited or biased. It was his own camera, his own perspective, his own actions. They also saw Diane's phone footage, which corroborated the body camera from an outside perspective, showing Hargrove threatening to arrest her for recording and calling 911. Day 3 brought Diane's testimony. She described watching the illegal arrest unfold, calling 911, and Hargrove's threat to arrest her for recording. The jury saw her as a credible, neutral witness, a retired federal prosecutor with no personal stake in the outcome except her outrage at witnessing a constitutional violation. I've prosecuted hundreds of cases in my career, Diane testified. I know what probable cause looks like. I know what a lawful arrest looks like. What I witnessed that day was neither. It was a police officer harassing a homeowner based solely on the color of his skin. Days 4 through 6 featured Hargrove's previous victims. Isaiah Chambers testified about being arrested while mowing his own lawn. His voice broke when he described the humiliation of being handcuffed in front of his neighbors, people he had lived next to for 8 years. After Hargrove arrested me in my own yard, some of them started crossing the street when they saw me. That's what racial profiling does. It doesn't just violate your rights, it makes you a suspect in your own community. Dr. Navarro described the illegal car search, the way Hargrove had scattered her belongings across the street while neighbors watched a professional woman being treated like a drug dealer. Mateo Solis testified about Hargrove demanding proof he owned his house while he was painting his fence. Hargrove's first assumption wasn't that I was the homeowner. It was that I must be hired help or trespassing. Javier Ortega, now 22 and in college, testified about being detained at 16 while walking to his grandmother's house. Hargrove stopped me like I was a criminal. He made me sit on the curb for 30 minutes while he verified my story. I felt ashamed, like I had done something wrong just by existing in that neighborhood. Each victim's testimony built on the others, creating an undeniable pattern. Hargrove didn't just make one mistake with Terrence. He had spent 20 years targeting people of color, assuming they didn't belong in certain spaces, and using his badge to harass them. Expert witnesses testified about the Fourth Amendment, about property rights, about how Hargrove had violated clearly established constitutional protections that any reasonable officer would know. A constitutional law expert, one of Terrence's colleagues from the university, explained to the jury that Hargrove's entry onto Terrence's property was illegal trespass. His search of the shed was a warrantless search, and his arrest was false imprisonment. Professor Kwame Osei walked the jury through each element of the Fourth Amendment violations with careful precision. The Fourth Amendment protects us from unreasonable searches and seizures, Professor Osei explained. Officer Hargrove entered Dr. Williams' property without permission, without a warrant, and without exigent circumstances. That's trespass. He then searched his shed without his consent and without a warrant. That's an illegal search. Finally, he arrested him when he asserted his constitutional rights. That's false imprisonment. Each of these violations is clearly established in law. Any reasonable officer would know they're unconstitutional. The defense tried to argue Hargrove had reasonable suspicion to investigate building code violations. The prosecution destroyed this by calling the city's building inspector, who testified that police don't enforce building codes, and that Hargrove had no training or authority to make building code determinations. Inspector Inez Castellano testified that in her 15 years with the city, she had never once called police to investigate unpermitted construction. That's not how it works, she explained. Citizens file complaints with our office. We investigate. If we find violations, we issue citations through the civil process. Police don't get involved unless there's an immediate safety hazard requiring emergency action. A privacy fence poses no such hazard. Hargrove took the stand and tried to justify his actions. The cross-examination exposed the racism underlying every decision he had made. Officer Hargrove, Dr. Williams, was in his own backyard, on his own property, installing a fence. What about that situation required police intervention? I observed construction activity that appeared to lack proper permits. But you're not a building inspector. You have no training in building codes. So why did you decide this required your attention? Hargrove hesitated, and the jury watched his struggle play out. The neighborhood has had issues with unpermitted construction. Really? How many other homeowners in Westgate have you stopped for building fences or sheds? I don't recall specific numbers. Let me help you. We reviewed your reports from the past 5 years. You've never once stopped a homeowner for unpermitted construction. Never. So why did you stop Dr. Williams? Hargrove didn't answer. You told Dr. Williams that professors don't live in houses like his. What did you mean by that? I was questioning whether he actually owned the property. Why would you question that? He was in the backyard with tools, clearly the homeowner. What made you doubt his ownership? In my experience, people sometimes claim to own property they're actually just working on. People or black people, because all 37 of your complaints for racial profiling involve Hispanic or black citizens. Can you explain that? Hargrove's attorney objected, but the jury had heard enough. The body camera footage had already shown them everything they needed to know. The jury deliberated for 8 hours. They found Hargrove guilty on all counts: deprivation of rights under color of law, illegal trespass, illegal search, false arrest, and assault. The judge sentenced him to 14 years in federal prison. In her sentencing remarks, she noted that Hargrove had spent 20 years violating the constitutional rights of minority citizens, that he had shown no remorse, and that his conduct represented a fundamental betrayal of the oath he had taken to serve and protect. The civil lawsuit settled for $6.4 million. The city agreed to pay $5.1 million to Terrence directly, and another $1.3 million to establish a fund for Hargrove's other victims. The settlement required comprehensive reforms. Body cameras became mandatory for all officers, with automatic termination for turning cameras off during civilian interactions. A civilian review board was established with real investigative power. Statistical monitoring tracked every officer's stops and searches by race, flagging disparities for investigation. Terrence used his settlement to establish a legal defense fund for victims of illegal searches and police trespass. The fund provided free representation to people whose constitutional rights had been violated. He testified before Congress about accountability for police misconduct and wrote a book about his experience that became required reading in police academies. Hargrove lost everything: his career, his freedom, his pension. He became a case study in law schools, an example of how racism and abuse of power destroy lives. The 42 people Hargrove had victimized finally got justice. Complaints that had been dismissed were reopened. Victims came forward describing years of harassment the department had ignored. Diane Kessler received a commendation from the city council for documenting the violation. Lieutenant Baptiste was promoted to captain and implemented the required reforms. The department fired 3 other officers with similar patterns. Professor Terrence Holloway returned to teaching constitutional law with a story that his students would never forget. He would often begin his Fourth Amendment lecture by playing Hargrove's body camera footage, showing exactly what happens when an officer decides that someone doesn't belong based on nothing more than the color of their skin. If this story opened your eyes to how racism operates through assumptions about who belongs where, hit that subscribe button. Share this video with someone who needs to understand that constitutional rights matter for everyone, not just people who look a certain way. Drop a comment telling me what stood out to you most. Was it the neighbor who recorded everything? The lieutenant who actually did his job? The body camera that captured Hargrove's own crimes? Or the fact that it took a law professor getting arrested for the department to finally act? I want to hear your thoughts.